Remember, to remind you what we were discussing yesterday, we had a debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda whether you could use an animal for a wall of a sukkah. And the Gemara framed the debate that according to Rabbi Meir, at least according to Abaye, we were concerned that the animal would die. According to Rabbi Zeir, we were concerned the animal would run away. It was a type of exera. And then the Gemara had a question, and then the sukkah, the wall would shrink, it wouldn't be 10 tefachim. And then the Gemara had a question that how could Abaye make this a debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, whether you would be concerned if it would die, if Abaye himself had Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda have the reverse positions about the debate. Because there's a Mishnah that basically says that that if a woman is married to a Kohen and he leaves on a trip, she can assume he's still alive, so we're not concerned he died, and therefore she can no longer eat truma. And on the other hand, if he gives her a get and says, "This is your get a minute before I die," that she can't eat truma. So what is it? Are we concerned he'll die, or are we not concerned he'll die? And Abaye said that this is really a debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. But he quoted a Mishnah, but then linked it in to a Mishnah of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which is the reverse of our debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about the animal dying. Why? This was a point about taking trumas and maestras from grain bought from Kutim, Samaritans, and you want to take it, and it's already bein hashmashos, and you can't actually directly be mafresh trumas and maestras and bein hashmashos. So what do? You say, I'm taking it, but I'm taking trumas and maestras, etc., on the thing that I will designate after Shabbos. Right. And that's the idea of breira. Based on what you're going to designate later Shabbos, that will retroactively mean what you will be doing here. Now, I want to clarify, I don't think I said it precisely correct yesterday. Two important points. Number one is that we actually are assuming that the grain bought from the Kutim is definitely tevel, meaning it's not a suffix, it's not demai, it's treated as definitely tevel. Thank you. But nevertheless, we allow you to take it on bein hashmashos. We would not allow you to take normal tevel on bein hashmashos because you are doing it in a way where you are not actually designating it right now. You're taking it without designating it because you're doing this trick. We let you do it bein hashmashos. So that's
designate it because
no, you're not allowed to be mafresh trumas and maestras from tevel, from vare tevel on Shabbos or even bein hashmashos because it looks like you're fixing something. You're fixing the grain, but we'll let you do it in this sort of more, as it were, right? Not as much of a direct designation.
No, bein
hashmashos is it's the suffix Shabbos, suffix Yom, suffix Laila. So Rabbi Meir says that you're allowed to, and Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to. And it sounds like that's the debate of whether something will die, but in the reverse, that Rabbi Meir is concerned that the barrels will break. So Rabbi Meir is not concerned the barrels will break, and Rabbi Yehuda won't let you do it because he's concerned the barrels will break. And when it becomes Motzei Shabbos, you won't have something to take, and it won't retroactively be any good. So that's the question about, there we have a debate of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. Will something die? Will the barrel break? But it is the reverse of what Abaye wanted to say. Abaye wanted to say Rabbi Meir is afraid the animal will die. Rabbi Yehuda isn't. And here we have Rabbi Meir being okay with this trick of taking the wine and not being afraid what will happen if the wine flask will break. And Rabbi Yehuda is afraid what will happen if the wine flask will break. So that's sort of where we left off. So I'll pick up, although we had gotten halfway through the daf, we'll reread it just to ground us again. So we'll pick up from the top of Chafdal Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says like this. The very last line on the very last word on the first line of Chafdal Amud Aleph. So with this issue of the wine and the flask breaking, again, it sounds like Rabbi Meir is not concerned and Rabbi Yehuda is concerned. So the Gemara says, April, reverse it, meaning not reverse who says one in the Mishnah about the wine, but when Abaye was saying the question about will the Kohen die and can the wife continue to eat is a debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. It's not this Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about the wine. It's Rabbi Meir's chayesh lemisa, Rabbi Yehuda lo chayesh lemisa. It's Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda of our case about the animal that's the wall. Rabbi Meir is concerned the animal will die. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned, and that's the same debate of whether the wife of the Kohen can continue to eat when the Kohen gives her the get or leaves the house on a trip. So Rabbi Meir is the one concerned about death by the animal. by the Kohen, Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about death. Titania, and this is the debate, what we said before. Asal behema dofen l'sukkah, Rabbi Meir post Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Fine. So now we get that the issue about can the Kohen's wife eat the truma, are we afraid the Kohen will die, depends on the debate of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda by the animal. Well, are we afraid the animal will die? But now we have to say, but then how does it fit into the wine case? Tashid Rabbi Meir to Rabbi Meir. So now Rabbi Meir, who's not concerned the animal will die, not concerned that the Kohen will die. I'm sorry, Rabbi Meir, who is concerned the animal will die, is concerned that the Kohen will die. Why is he not concerned about the wine? So a flask will break. Amlucha Rabbi Meir, Misa Shchicha, B'kias Hanod Lo Shchicha. Death is more common than a flask breaking. That's not a very optimistic view on life. Evker de Masulei L'Shomer. You know, you can have somebody watch a flask not to break. Who's going to protect somebody from dying? People do die. Okay, so yes, Rabbi Meir is concerned the animal will die and the Kohen will die. He's not concerned about the flask. Kashid Rabbi Yehuda. How about Rabbi Yehuda? If Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned the animal will die, not concerned the Kohen will die, why is he concerned that the flask will break? So the Gemara says, no. Time is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's concern is not about the flask will break. He's not concerned about those things. And presumably, as we said before, the flask breaking is a lesser concern than dying. And he's not concerned that people will die, animals die, flasks will break. He's not concerned with any of that. So he's not. He just doesn't like doing. He doesn't allow you to do it because he doesn't believe that what you do Motzei Shabbos can retroactively define what you did Bein Hashmashos. But he's not at all concerned about things breaking. So the Gemara says, you're telling me he's not concerned the flask will break? The Hamidikhtani Seifa, Amrullah Rabbi Meir, they, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Meir, aren't you, Rabbi Meir, concerned the flask will break? And then retroactively he'll have drunk tevel, so there'll never be any wine after Shabbos and the whole thing won't work out retroactively?
Okay, it will have broken in the meantime.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's not around Motzei Shabbos, then it's not there to designate.
Right.
He said back to them, I'll worry about it when it happens, meaning I'm not worried about it. So you see, Michlal, the Chayish Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned that the flask will break. So how can you say he's not concerned the animal will die, he's not concerned the Kohen will die, he's concerned the flask will break? So Hasa, no, the Gemara says no. Rabbi Yehuda Udekamer Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Yehuda answering Rabbi Meir on his own terms. Lidi D, as far as I'm concerned, Lacely Brera, I reject this whole idea of this trick. Now it's Trumas and Mice is based on what I'm going to say. I don't buy this whole Brera thing. Okay, fine. We have a fundamental agreement. You believe you can do this Brera. You can designate something later. Retroactively, it means what you're saying now. You still shouldn't allow this case. You should at least concede that you can't do it here because the flask might break. And I'm like, no, I'm not worried about it. Okay, so what we have is the issue by the wine is not a general concern of are you concerned about death. The wine presumably is more able to be protected against that. And there's other issues to raise. They're Brera issues, but it's not the concern of death. And we're saying that the issue about the animal for the wall of the Sukkah is a concern about death. And that maps onto the issue about whether the Kohen's wife can continue to eat Truma. So the Gemara says the following. 1 minute. How can you say Rabbi Yehuda isn't concerned about death? Tanan, we taught in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the first Mishnah in Yoma. Right? Don't remember that whole thing? Yeah. That he says you have to have a backup wife. Maybe his wife will die. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned about death. So actually, all the sources so far line up. The Rabbi Yehuda is concerned about death. He doesn't like the wine thing because the wine flask will break. He could be the one that says that the Kohen's wife can't continue to eat, right? So, and now you've got him being the one that wants a backup wife. So if you explain the issue of the animal of the wall to a sukkah in a different way, then it actually works out much better because then all the Rabbi Yehudas sort of line up. But now we're trying to assert that the issue about the animal is about death. So don't you see that Rabbi Yehuda is concerned? How could you say he's not concerned? So the Gemara says, Ha'id Marallah, Amar Avuna Brei Rabbi Yoshua, Mala Asu B'Chapara. No, that's come on, it's Kohen Gadol, it's Yom Kippur. We make a lot of crazy demands there. You got to 7 whole days beforehand, and you have to ashes of the paraduma each one of the 7 days. So, we just are having a lot of extreme concerns that we know under normal halachic circumstances would not. Okay, so now what we have done is we've argued that the issue about the animal, according to Rabbi, is an issue of are you concerned about death or not, although that led to problems because a number of Rebbe Yehudas seem to be concerned about death, and according to this explanation, he's not. We managed to somehow resolve them. He's not really concerned about the flask breaking, he's just arguing Rebbe Meir Shutaso. He's not really concerned about people dying, it's just a Yom Kippur issue. Fine. That's the way we're saying it right now. I should, by the way, before we continue to a new approach about the animal, say something about this issue about the Kohen's wife being concerned that her husband will die. The Gemara here has made it a debate, are you concerned about death or not? But the Gemara elsewhere makes it a more interesting conceptual difference. The two scenarios were, one was that the Kohen went on a trip, and his wife can continue to eat truma, assuming that he's alive. The other is the Kohen gives a get to his wife and says, this get will take effect a minute before I die, and she can't eat, because every minute she has to be concerned, this is the minute before he dies. So the way the Gemara has explained this is a debate, are you concerned about death or not? But there's actually another Gemara that says, no, it doesn't have to be that. There's a difference between the two cases. And this is a very interesting but important difference. It says, Shema meis lo chayshinan. Shema yamus chayshinan. Right? In one case, can I eat truma if my husband is on a trip? The question is he alive now or is he dead? I don't have to be concerned that he's dead. He left alive, I can assume that he's still alive. I don't have to assume that this minute he's dead. But if my husband gives me a get and says this will take effect a minute before I die, so I don't have to, for it to be a problem, I don't have to say right now he's dead. What do I have to say? Maybe he will die a minute from now. So even though I know he's alive, and therefore I can assume he's still alive, that doesn't tell me that he's going to be alive a minute from now. A minute from now I'll be able to say he's still alive. But the status quo that he's alive, you don't understand it, Charlie?
Yeah, I understand it.
It doesn't work in terms of probability.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not a mathematical issue.
Yeah.
It's a status quo issue.
What's the motivation for saying? What's the
Yeah, I
motivation for
understand that.
saying
It's just-
this get takes effect a minute before I die?
So that she's not left to have to hachiv of yibum with the brother.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so right, meaning if it's an assertion of facts, then we assume the facts are the way we saw them last, and he's still alive. If it's a question about what will happen, well, what the facts are right now doesn't predict the future, and he might die a minute from now. So that's a very nice distinction the Gemara makes elsewhere, not here. Here it makes it a concern about death and makes a distinction between, and makes it a debate, are we concerned about death or not? Yes.
Brera question. What's the difference between Brera, as we've been explaining it, and, for example, the following?
Right, so that's what some of these big Tosusim are about. Basically, the difference between Tanai and Brera, although the problem is that there's one or two Gemaras that try to conflate the two, but the difference between a condition and Brera is that the condition is you're saying, all the components about what make up the act. This is the get, or this is the kesef kiddushin. You are the woman I'm giving it to. All of those things are defined. What you are making conditional is whether it will or won't take effect based on whether a certain condition is met. As opposed to by Brera, where it's more that the very constituent objects themselves are not defined. Which thing goes to you and which thing goes to me will be determined based on what I say in the future, right? Whether which wine is Trumas and Maestris and which wine is not, the object that I am actually being mafresh is not defined now. If I say I'm being mafresh this wine as this barrel as truma, but on the condition that A, B, and C happen, that A happens, but if A doesn't happen, I mafresh that barrel. That's not Brera, that's its not, because each act is sort of the constituents of the act are defined. It's just whether or not it takes effect is what is being held in abeyance. As opposed to classic Brera, where it's the very objects and the constituents of the acts that are not defined, that are not defined. That's like one way of explaining the difference, okay? But it's complicated, it's what Big Tosis is about, but there generally is a difference when you say this should happen on the condition that's a Tanai.
Right.
If you say this will happen to the thing that I designate later, that's brera, because the thing you're doing it is not defined right
In
now.
Brewer, when you say as of Motzi Shabbos, does that mean, like when you say retroactively, does that mean as of that moment when I'm saying it, it's no longer tevel?
Yes. How could you drink it if you didn't say that?
Right.
So that's the whole
That's a
point.
huge.
So that's the whole point.
Right. It's as if it's already changed its status before the condition has become chal.
Right. Once the condition is chal, then we look retroactively and say that that's what took effect when you said it. But that doesn't make it different from a tanai. By a tanai, I can say this is your get or this is your kiddushin as of this minute on the condition that the Mets win the World Series, and then. If and when the Mets ever win the World Series, how long ago did that happen? Anyway, then retroactively it'll be as of today. So tonight also can be retroactive. That's not the difference.
That would show me so much.
Okay, so anyway, right. Okay, yes.
When a person dies, then is the wife automatically considered that she can remarry?
So when the person dies, in that case of the get with the Kohen's wife?
In other words, why I'm asking, why you said it was because of Yevamot.
Right.
But I'm wondering, but might also be because that way she's free to remarry?
No, she'd be free to marry anyway because he's a widow.
Once he's done, okay.
Right, and anyway, the get makes her usher to marry a Kohen, so it makes it more problematic. Maybe that's why he's doing it. He wants to prevent her from marrying a Kohen. Okay, anyway, so let's take a look. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says like this. So now the way we frame the issue about the animal for the wall, whether it's a concern of death, according to Abai, or concern of running away, according to Rabbi Seira, biblically it's a good mechitza. For Rabbanan who degaz Rabban, it's a rabbinic concern. That's what we said the other day. Right? Dov wanted to say, oh well, maybe because it might die, it's not considered that it's going to be a dwelling because the wall isn't permanent or the wall is very is not stable. But the Gemara here frames it very much, and it was clear all along that the Gemara was not seeing it that way. The Gemara was seeing it as no, it is kosher, but we don't let you use it because it might die, it might run away, and then you won't be paying attention and you won't be yotzei. And that's the concern.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So the midaraisa mechitza ma'al biblically it's good. That's the way they're explaining it. Rabbanan hu degazru, but it's a rabbinic concern. Elamei ato Rabbi Meir titamam mishum golel. According to that, you can only be machmir. You can say, I'm afraid it'll run away, I'm afraid it'll die, don't use it. But why? How can we ever be lenient? And what if you're trying to use this thing as a type of a headstone for a grave, which sounds totally bizarre, but the idea is it might be some type of a marker, and that you're waiting until you can get the headstone actually there. So you're using it to mark the grave. And there's a halacha. It's a big debate. What exactly is a gola? What exactly is a dofak? But certain things that are parts of the grave are metameh like the grave.
So it's tied there.
It's tied there. Yeah. So anyway, so okay, if it's a concern, it might die, might run away, that's a chumrah. But how would it ever lead to a kula? Alamatnan, why did we teach in a Mishnah? Reb Yehuda mitami mishum gola. If you use this animal, Reb Yehuda, again, treats animals like any other object, and it can be used as a wall of the sukkah. It has the tuma of a gola, of a gravestone. Rabbi Meir mitayir. Rabbi Meir says that it's Torah. So how could that be? Clearly, it's not just a gzeira and a stringency. It's a more central, intrinsic issue that he's disqualifying it. So the Gemara says, Ella, you know what? Forget everything we've just said. You're right. We had a whole lovely daf yesterday, a whole question about who holds of death. Is it Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda? That's not what's going on here. Because then he would only be machmir, and we see that he's also mekil. Ella Maravacha Bar Yaakov, Kasavar Rabbi Meir. Here's Rabbi Meir's reasoning, his problem with the animal. Kol mechitza shomeres beruach ein mechitza. Any mechitza that's only standing up with wind, with the spirit, the animating life spirit of animals, is not a real mechitza. Now, one wonders if this is being a little bit of a pun, because until now we've been saying what's a not good mechitza on Sukkah, called mechitza she'ena yichola lamod beruach mitzuya, can't stand up against a wind. And here we're saying any mechitza that is standing beruach through a wind, which is how it's imagining the soul, is not a real mechitza. Now, I would have explained that to mean, it's not true based on the next line of Gemara. That's basically what you were suggesting yesterday. That since it's only standing because it's alive and it might die, there's a sense of impermanence to it because it's only because of the fact that it needs to remain alive. The life is what's sustaining it. Okay, but we're going to see the Gemara is going to translate ruach in a much more literal way. 1 minute. So the Gemara says like this. So that Ikadami, some say Amar Rava Bar Yaakov Kasav Rabbi Meir Kol Mechitza Sheina Asui Bidei Adam Ein Mechitza. If it's not made by human beings, it's not a mechitza. So the Gemara says, "My beinayu." What would be a difference? Iga beinayu de ukma b'no tapuach. You basically had a wall as an inflatable flask. You used a big balloon as a wall. Okay, no animals, a big balloon. If Rabbi Meir's concern is that it's something that's standing up by a wind, it's not valid. So it has nothing to do with life. Right? It has to do somehow with the idea that the fact that it is sustained by something non-physical, that this is the idea. Whatever it is, ruach means something like non-physical. We're going to see, we all know the air is physical, but somehow it's not seen as material. So it's basic sort of, it's like the opposite of the idea of mamid we have in halacha, or it is the idea of mamid, but in the reverse way. Like we say, let's say you have something, a treif ingredient in something that cannot, this is the gelatin issue, that cannot be tasted, but it gives form to the object. So maybe that means that it's like its identity is imparted by the fact that it gives the form to the thing, even though it's not the essence of the thing. Here, basically, since the mechitza is standing up because of a non-physical, something that's defined halachically as ruach, not really physical, and you can't really feel it, right? So it's air, it's the life spirit. So then this is not really considered a physical mechitza. It's not a real mechitza. What gives it its standing is a non-physical thing. It doesn't constitute as a real physical mechitza. It's quite fascinating. If you want to use a mechitza based on good osik, a magic invisible mechitza, fine. But if your basic mechitza starts with something sustained by something not physical, that's considered to be right, not a real mechitza. That's about one. But if your concern is that it's not made by human hands, it is made by human hands. So this now becomes, forget the whole idea of are you concerned about it will die. It's a more central question about if something is sustained by like a life spirit, then it is not, according to Rabbi Meir, that is not considered to be an actual. Gemara says it's not a mechitza, but the problem is that this also has to tie into the issue about the golo, about whether it's part of the grave, which is not about it being a mechitza. But somehow the fact that it's being sustained by a life spirit, and that's part of what gives it its shape that is necessary for this halacha, right? You wouldn't use a dead animal somehow it's important that it's a standing animal, that you're using it for your grave marker. So what gives this thing its halachic shape is the fact that it's being sustained by something not physical. So for Rabbi Meir, that cannot be used because we cannot give it its meaning or its status based on it being sustained through this non-physical entity. That's a very fascinating idea. The idea, by the way, that it has to be done bidei adam would also mean that Rabbi Meir shouldn't allow you to use, for example, a tree for a sukkah. Right, which is what we've had before, that you've had trees for walls. So it's quite fascinating if that's his issue, that he only says it by behema. There's a lot of other things he could disqualify. So it does seem that the first approach, that it's more about the life, the animal as a living thing, does seem to be, more about what's going on here. Yes.
With the golel and the tumor, why didn't the Gemara say that it was a gezerah de Rabbanan about the tumor piece? Why?
Because it's a kula. The golel, according to Rabbi Meir, because it's not a golel, it's tahor. So you can't have a gezerah leading for it to be tahor. It had to have a fundamental reason why it does not have a status. Okay, why it can't be used. Yes.
There wouldn't just be a problem with the tree, but you couldn't use a natural geologic feature.
That's a good point too. Can you use a rock?
Side of a rock, yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard to understand the Einas Bidei Adam because you would have to be eliminating many more things. So I don't know. The more logical thing, to fit it into the focus on the animal is this concept of omedet beruah. It's an interesting, but they tell kids how to do the science experiments to show that air has weight. Because kids don't, you can't believe that air has weight. It's like invisible. It's not real. So you do is you take a balloon and you blow it up, and you take a same balloon unblown up and you put it on a balance scale, and you see that the blown up balloon, right, weighs more. So it's a nice little way of demonstrating air has weight. But for the Gemara, it's all ruach. It's not really real. You can't feel it. What?
How does that work? There's no more air than there was before.
No, there's not, because there's more air in the balloon. A blown up balloon has this amount of air, where an unblown balloon only has like the thin amount of air that fills it.
And the balloon with air is heavier than air, therefore it puts weight on the balance on the scale.
But why is that?
No, Dove's question is, isn't there air above the scale
With the
that's
envelope
putting
of the balloon, there's also the same amount of air as above the
around it?
Right, but that gets taken up because the air pressure is the same in all directions.
scale. We can knock that out.
Okay, fine. Yet another machlokas here. It does work though. You can try it.
Nice.
Okay. Amar Mar Mishum. Okay, so now the last point is that we've got Rabbi Meir figured out. Now we're going to look at Rabbi Yossi, who applies it also to a get. Amar Mar. So Mishum Rabbi Yossi Aglili Amru. So in the name of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, they said, going back to this Raita, Af ein kosin olav gitei nashim. You can't write a get on an animal. Now, presumably Rabbi Meir wouldn't have a problem with this, because the animal, whether alive or dead, you could write a get on it, right? So it's not. So even if he doesn't want, even if he wants to discount the fact that it's alive, that can't be a part of its identity. But this wouldn't matter. So Rabbi Meir wouldn't have a problem of writing a get, but Rabbi Yossi Aglili has a problem of writing a get. Well, you have to figure out why that is. My time is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's his reasoning? Titani, we turn to Brisa. Sefer. It says because of la sefer krisos. The husband writes a bill of divorce. A book of divorce. Ainly a sefer. I only know you can write it in a sefer, which would mean like a classic sefer, like with a cloth. Minayin l'Rabbis kol davar. How do I know you can write it on things other than a cloth? Talmud Lamar v'katav. He shall write it. V'katav la mikol makom. It's not limited to a sefer. V'katav la is more general. So im kain matam domer sefer. So then what's sefer doing? It seems to limit it to only like a cloth. Lo malacha, to tell you, ma sefer davar she'ein bo ruach chaim beinu ochel. The same way a book is something that's not alive and isn't food. Av kol davar she'ein bo ruach chaim beinu ochel. So also it has to be not alive and not food. You can write a get on anything except something that's not alive and not food. Now, if I would have, said it has to be like a book, why, or like a cloth, why would you pick of all the things those two characteristics, not food and not alive? I mean, okay, you do see that those are pretty different than a sense of like an inanimate, piece of cloth, but you could have picked other characteristics. So Tosfos says, if you take a look at very important Tosfos, he says, Ma sefer shein bo ruach chayim. So he says, always when the Gemara sort of says it has to be like X, how does it know which characteristics to identify as the salient ones? So the last line of the Tosfos is, B'chol echad kifi ma shedoma l'chachamim inyan haroi lo. Whenever we have to say, like, it has to be like X, based on the word in a pasuk, klal pradu klal, anything like the prat, anything like this, to identify what are the relevant characteristics of that thing that it has to be similar to. The sages make each decision based on what's appropriate for the context. So, there's no way a priori that we're going to prove these are the two salient characteristics. Their assessment of what most is like a sefer and most is relevant for the get context is something inanimate and not food. I don't know why not food, but food maybe could be easily consumed and destroyed and so on. I know those two characteristics are true about parchment, but there's 10 other characteristics that are true about parchment. Why do we pick those two that has to be similar to? Why don't we say it has to come from an animal? Why don't we say it has to be something that's classically used for writing something on? Why don't we say, I don't know, why don't we say it has to be thin? Who knows which are the relevant characteristics that we pick out? So obviously, you make an assessment, what are the most relevant characteristics based on your understanding of the context and, what seems to be most relevant. He says that in the end is the discretion of the Chachamim, how to interpret. The pasuk sort of says it has to be similar. What constitutes the characteristics of similarity? That's for the Chachamim to decide.
This is a very important statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, two questions. So, first of all, Tosfos picked on two other areas. Of course, it's more about the concept.
Right. Exactly. So why? Yeah.
It's a little strange that he would say, well, here and here, rather than say everywhere in the Gemara.
Right.
But also, I was wondering if Tosfos would say that they know what the answer is going to be. It's maybe some kind of Masorah or something, or not exactly how the motion. See that, but you know what the answer is you have to find a pasuk.
You mean right?
Or something together.
Right. So that's true.
But
meaning
he doesn't say that.
He says that the Chachamim have discretion. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I will say that idea, if the Gemara makes it sound like there's a general debate of academics, and it's actually a debate of Rishonim. How many of the drashot are things that we sort of knew the halacha, and then we work backwards to find a drasha that supports it, which isn't exactly the same as a smachta, because a smachta means it's rabbinic. This means like we have a tradition that this is the meaning of the pasuk, but then we use a hermeneutic to find a way to give it that, to connect it that way. Or do we really not know what the meaning is and we derive it based on the hermeneutics? So, there's a debate whether is it A, is it B, is it, some mix of A and B, case by case. You read the Gemara gives you the sense that we're always deriving it, that we're never retrofitting it. Okay, but that being said, some Rishonim do say that sometimes we're retrofitting it, and some Achronim do, and it's right. And then that's true. You do have that in the Gemara. That is true. You do have that sometimes in the Gemara. They were forgotten, Bimei Yoshua, and then they were restored. That is true. Okay, so now the Gemara, but it's very important, at least according to Tosfos, about what it says about sort of the discretion in Torah Shabbat Peh. So now we go on. So it says like this. That's how we learn that it can't be an animal. That's where Rabbi Yossi Aglili comes from. V'Rabbanan, what would the rabbi say back? Ikasuv b'sefer, you shall write in a book. Kidakamis, then it's like you said, you'd have to limit the material because it has to be book-like to some degree. Hashadichsiv sefer, it doesn't say write in a book. It says write a sefer. Sefer doesn't mean book here. What does sefer mean? L'sfiras dvarim ba'almahu da'asa. Write a sefer kritut means a story. Write a narrative of divorce. Don't write a book or write in a book. Write something that narrates the fact that this is a divorce. Rabbanan, hi v'kasav by Darshi Bey. So if that's what sefer means, why do you need v'kasav to be more broad? You don't need it more broad. You never limited it. It's so funny. Don't you need v'kasav just for the pasuk itself to tell you have to write? Anyway, so the Gemara says, "Hu mi bayale b'ksiva miskareshes ve'ena miskareshes b'kesef." That only by writing and not, you can't give money to effect a divorce. Again, it's not exactly clear to me what extra word the Gemara is learning it out from. You need maybe the vav. What? The nasan la sefer krisus, because he doesn't have to be the one to write it. Yeah. Okay. But all right. So anyway, so because of it saying only by writing.
I would have thought it said like an oral.
Yeah, but that there's no basis to say. But here's a basis to say why money would have done it. I would have thought that leaving is connected to coming, right? It says by the divorced wife, it says he divorces his wife. He leaves his house and she becomes to another man. So from there we learn that the same way, for example, you can divorce with a get, you can marry with a shtar as well. So maybe I'll also say the reverse. So mahavaya bekesef. If that's true, then why don't I say the same way you can marry with money? Af yitziyah bekesef, get divorced with money. Kamash malan, only v'kasav, only by writing. Okay, so now the rabbis learned out, had any reason to limit the material you're writing on, and v'kasav comes to tell you only by writing, not by something else. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who uses v'kasav and sefer to tell you you can write it on. You can't write it on everything. You can write it on a wide range of things, but not everything. So, Hai Svar Minale, where does he know to exclude the marriage, a divorce through money? Mi sefer krisus nafka. Sefer korsa ve'ein davar acher korsa. No, because the word sefer kritut and the juxtaposition says only through a sefer does it effect severance, divorce, and not through something else. So that's where he learns you can't do it through money. The idach, what do the rabbis learn from the juxtaposition of sefer krisus? It has to effect a complete separation. Like we taught in the Brisa. If he gives her wife a get and says, this is your get on the condition you never drink wine in your entire life, or you never go to your father's house, it's not a good get, because it's a stipulation that for her entire life keeps her bound to her husband. She never will be absolutely free of her husband, right? We'll never know if the get retroactively won't take effect. So therefore, that does not, even if he does fulfill the t'nai, it's not a get, because it's given in a way that never fully affects severance. If you say for 30 days you can't do these things, it is good, because after 30 days she will be totally free of her husband. So that's what they learned from Sefer Kritut. The Idach and Rabbi Yossi will say back, Mikaris Krisus Nafka. So it could have said Sefer Karet. It says Sefer Kritut to tell you two things: only buy a book and a complete severance. The Idach and the Chachamim will say back, Karis Krisus Lodarshi. They're not impressed with the Karis and the Krisus. It doesn't tell you anything new. So anyway, a whole long discussion about how we are, that Reb Yossi excludes, we've excluded animals according to Rabbi Meir, because when they need to be standing, and their standingness is only created through this spirit, then it's not considered, we can't give that any halachic weight. It's not a real material thing. It's really a fascinating idea of how much halacha is about our concrete physical world, and it's not about our religious reality, if you would. Anyway, that's Rabbi Meir. But the animal not for a get, why not? It doesn't have to be alive. So that's a Reb Yossi Haglili idea that says it has to be similar in some ways to the idea of a classic sefer, classic klaf, and the rabbis don't read it that way. Okay, now we go on to the next Mishnah. Ha'osa sukato bein ha'ilanot, ve'ilanot tefanos lak sheira. So here exactly, we mentioned a minute ago the issue about using a tree, something not made by human hands. Here the Mishnah says it's totally fine. You make your sukkah between trees, and the tree serves as walls, it's fine. Doesn't sound like a big chiddush. Let's see what the Gemara says. Amar Avacha bar Yaakov, Kol mechitza she'eni yichol l'lamod beruach mitzuya eina mechitza. So this ties back to statements we had about the sukkah on the boat, that any mechitza that cannot stand with a normal wind is not a mechitza. There's a question about whether it has to withstand a abnormal wind, whether it has to be able to withstand the normal winds on the ocean, but we can all agree that if it can't withstand a normal wind on the dry land, that doesn't count as a mechitza. Not for sukkah, not for Shabbos. It can't count as a type of a wall for any halacha. Okay, it's not. Let's see if this works. You can use the tree as walls. 1 minute, the trees sway in the wind. So according to you, they're not really, how could they serve as walls? So even in a normal wind, it wouldn't stay that way. So what are we talking about? Percussion, a very old, strong tree that it doesn't sway. And its trunk is very solid. So the Gemara says, Va'ika nofo. But 1 minute, what about the foliage? What's that called? What's the word for the canopy of the tree?
Foliage.
Canopy?
Yeah.
Is that the word?
Foliage is fine.
The canopy of a forest, right. Anyway, but what about the whole head of the tree, right? So doesn't that sway? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the point could be, who said you're using the head of the tree? Maybe you're just using the trunk. I mean, for God's sake, it only has to be 10 tfachim. How many trees are how many trees are so low that they've got foliage within 10 tfachim, within 30 inches? It's got to be a
little sapling,
baby. Yeah, but it said
we
we're talking
actually have
about
a pine tree that's about this
okay,
high.
but it said we're talking about an old tree that's solid.
Yeah.
So maybe it imagines that you're making it higher up on the trees. You're not making it at ground level. You make a platform between trees higher up. What?
The willow, the leaves hang down to the ground.
Oh, okay. So maybe that. Actually, we're going to get a case just like the willow. Just like a willow in a minute. So 1 minute. Let's just see the answer. 1 minute. Let's just see the answer. So the Gemara says, okay, but if the foliage is part of the walls, isn't the foliage going to sway in the wind? So the Gemara says, Vaika nofo, no, you use various types of ropes and and cords to keep it in place, so it's not going to sway. It's all very much like we had before, the elephant being held up with the cords. Here, your tree is being held in a place by these ropes and cords or whatever. So the Gemara says, so what's the chiddush? No, the chiddush is we're not concerned you'll come to use a tree, because remember, you can't use a tree on Yantiv. Kamashim, that you put things on it, or you may break off a branch. Kamash Malon, we're not concerned. It's not a chiddush that it's a wall. Of course, it's a wall. You got it all nailed down. But it is a chiddush that we're not concerned you'll come to use it. Okay, there's a question. Yeah.
What is the definition of a tree? For instance, in Bamei Maglikin, we have the peach time is described as a
right. So it could be that it considers certain types of things trees that we wouldn't, and therefore it's more concerned about the swaying. That is true. Yes.
You couldn't allow the foliage to blow anyway because it would cover the sukkah.
Oh well, but let's say it's totally at the side, meaning you've got the foliage, here, and it's right.
Okay, I was just thinking of it being more.
No, I imagine if here's your tree, right? You've got another tree here, right? So you sort of build a platform like this, right? And let's say, I don't know, well, I don't know. You'd have to figure it out that the foliage came more like that,
Yeah.
right? And you did something like that, so it's being used as your walls, right? And then you put your schach here, but the foliage there is somehow serving as the walls. Anyway, okay. So the Gemara says, now this, by the way, is an issue with those canvas sukkahs, that the wind comes and it blows it and it billows out, and it's, so it's no longer. Now the question the Gemara is exploring is, how much would it have to move to not be considered a wall? Presumably, it's only if after the movement it loses its wall status. So if it still stays within, let's say, 3 tfachim, right, and it's still anchored at the bottom, and even if it sort of billows out, it still sort of, stays within 3 tfachim, right? Presumably, that's okay. Meaning, what would be the halacha if you had a wall actually that looked like that? Let's say you had a wall that looked like the thing looks when it billows out, right? Let's say you had a wall like that.
That's almost every canvas food.
Right? So, maybe that is a wall. Who says that the wall has to be, totally perpendicular? I mean, we had cases before about something like this, right? And the whole, right? No, but even in our Gemara, we had a teepee with a roof or whatever, So anyway, so is that considered that it's not omedes beruach? So, does it have to be like within, within 3 tefachim so you can draw it? Now, maybe if it goes out here, it's not because it's not within 3 tefachim of the schach, but then it comes back up at the top. So anyway, how much does it have to blow by the wind in order to be a problem, in order to not be a wall? Because, the Gemara could have said that even if the wind blows it, if it sort of stays within certain, within the parameters of the sukkah, and sort of everything is sort of within 3 tefachim and so on, maybe it shouldn't be a problem. So presumably it has to blow so much that when it's after the wind is blowing, it can no longer count as a wall. That's presumably what Einu Omedes means. Okay, so the Gemara's first answer is that everything is nailed down. Tashma, come, let's try to prove it again. Hayasham Ilan Ogeder. So this is again the case of the corners around the well, and you're able to draw from the well, and it creates the area around the well as a rishus hayachid. Now, what can you use for those corners? Let's say that there was a tree at one of the corners, or there was a geder, which really means like a stone fence, a stone wall. Or there was a wall made by reeds. Nidon mishum diomed. You can use them to be parts of these corners around the well to create this rishus hayachid. So how can you do that? Won't the reeds blow in the wind, or the tree blow in the wind? So it says, fine, you tied it all down. Okay, Tashma, let's try again. Ilana Mesach, this is like the willow. If you have a tree that's overhanging on the ground, it creates a canopy with its sort of overhanging branches. If the branches are within 3 tefachim of the ground, then it forms a wall and you can carry under it. Okay, so right, you've got the picture, right? You've got your tree here, and its branches are hanging down like this. Okay, right? Those are the branches hanging down. So if the bottom of the branches here are within 3 tefachim of the ground, so it's like it's connected to the ground, and therefore you can use all of that as walls. And assuming you've got it on all sides, right, like that, right, then you have a rishus hayachid there, and you can carry in it. Okay, you got the idea. So the whole thing is hanging down. It creates a whole little, a whole canopy below. And if it's in with 3 tefachim of the ground, it becomes walls, and you can carry under it. Okay. Amai, why? Haka-azil v'asi, the branches will go higher than 3 tefachim with a little bit of wind. So the Gemara says, yeah, fine, you tied it down. If that's true, if you did it, then in the end it was made by human hands. It became a full mechitza by human hands. So then you should be able to carry in it no matter how big it is. Why? And how do we know you can't? Because Alama Amar Rav Huna Braid Rav Yoshua. Why does Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, say Ein metaltalin bo ela beit satayim? So why you can only carry in it if it's up to a beit satayim. So this will remind you of all the fun by Erevin. A beit satayim is 50 amot by 50 amot, and the basic idea is the following: 50 amot by 100 amot. It's 5,000 square amot, and the basic idea of a beit satayim is the following: is that if something is not a full mechitza, it is mechitza, but for example, a classic example is that it's not asui b'dei adam, it's a natural mechitza, it's not made by humans. So You know what? That's an imprecise way of saying it. The idea is like this. If the area is not considered hukaf lidira, if the area, yes, is surrounded by walls, but it's not surrounded for the purpose of habitation. There's a fence around it, there's a wall around it, but somehow it was done for other purposes other than habitation. Let's say, for example, you put a fence around a forest to keep out intruders. You're not making it so that anybody lives in it, you're just trying to keep people out. So an area that's not hukaf lidira, you cannot carry in, it's not considered rabbinically or just a yachid if it's bigger than Beit Zatayim, if it's bigger than 5,000 square miles. So the Gemara says, if this was made naturally, totally by the tree, I understand why you can't carry if it's bigger than Beit Zatayim. It's not hukaf lidira. It's completely natural. No human being ever surrounded the area for the purpose of habitation. But if you're saying that you tied down the branches, then you made it then it was made by a human, and then it should be made for the purpose of habitation. And then there should not be any limit in terms of how big it can be that you can still consider it a Rishus HaYachid. Okay, so why is it that there is a limit if it's being made by a human? It's considered made for habitation. So the Gemara says, Mishum Dahave, there's a different reason. Yes, it's made by humans, but still it's not hukaf lidira. Why not? Mishum Dahave dira shetash misheha la'avir. It's made for the air. For kol dira shetash misheha la'avir ein metatlim bo elas atayim. And that also you can't carry if it's bigger than Beit Zatayim. Now, what does it mean it's made for the air? So Rashi says, why would people sort of go under this tree and want there to be use the tree as walls? So Rashi imagines you're out there in the forest and you're watching your sheep or you're watching, the crops, and you want to take refuge underneath this tree. So not on Shabbos, generally. Okay. So the purpose is not that you want to be in it for the sake of being in it. You want to be in it in order to be watching what's going on outside of it. And that, according to Rashi, is called Tashmishel La'avir. I know, you're making a face. Right, so I don't understand. So if you made a guardhouse, would that be Tashmishel La'avir? Because you're watching what's going on outside? Anyway, so the answer is, yes, it's made by humans. Yes, it's made to live under it. But it's still, at some level, not considered hukaf lidira because it's made fundamentally for the area outside of it. Okay? But anyway, we had to say that because the easier answer is it wasn't made by humans and it's totally natural. And then obviously it's not made for the purpose of habitation, and that's why it would have the limit. Let's do one more case. Let's finish to the Mishnah. Tashma, Shabbat Betel, if somebody began Shabbos, so on one issue of mechitza is it a rishus yachid, can you carry in it? The other issue of a mechitza is if you're inside of a house, you measure 2,000 amot in every direction, right? So if you're inside of a house, you measure the 2,000 amot from the edges of the house, right? You don't measure it from where you're standing. So if you're in a rishus yachid, then if we consider the space you're in a Rishus HaYachid, the 2,000 amos starts from the edges of that space. Mm-hmm. If we don't, it starts from you. So this is another important discussion of is this a Rishus HaYachid or not. Okay, so you started Shabbos on top of a mound. Shu Gavo Asara, it's 10 tfachim high. Vume Arba Amos at Beit Zatayim, and it's from 4 amos to a Beit Zatayim. So that's going to be a Rishus HaYachid, to use the edges of the rock to be considered virtual walls. But again, only Beit Zatayim. More than Beit Zatayim, because it's natural, it is not considered a Rishus HaYachid. V'chein Benaka Shehu Amuk Asara, or similarly a crevice that's deep 10, Vumi Arba Amos at Beit Zatayim. V'chein Kama Kitsura, or if you're in the middle of cut wheat, right? V'shibolas Makifos Osa, and you have bundles of wheat surrounding you. All of this is Rishus HaYachid, and you can go the entire space and 2,000 amot from the outer limits. So the Gemara says, look, it's blowing and it's moving. So then it says, fine, you bound that down as well, and you tied that down as well. So a lot of ukimtas, but in the end, this becomes the issue that bothers people about the canvas sukkahs, which is why they now have these straps, so that even if the canvas billows, the wall is still created through this whole idea of lavud. All righty. Yep. So